Just a quick heads up that these are adults having adult conversations about things that take place on a show where the adults use a lot of adult language. All this to say there might be some salty language ahead, so please plan accordingly.
You think I'm scared, huh?
Yes, I do.
Maybe I don't want to learn the truth.
Ted, the truth will set you free. But first it'll piss you off.
What would Ted Lasso do? That's the question we explore in each episode of this podcast. We take the lessons we learned from Ted Lasso and apply them to the real world through the lens of leadership and positive psychology. My name is Dimple Dabalia.
And I'm Jeff Harry. We hope you enjoy this episode as much as we enjoyed making it, and that it helps you discover your own Lasso way and embrace what it means to believe. Welcome back. We are talking about Ted Lasso. What would Ted Lasso do? And we're talking about Season 2, Episode 7, Headspace. Lots of stuff going on. Dimple, drop some knowledge. What did you think of this episode? As there was a lot in there.
But I just want to say that the episode was written by Phoebe Walsh, who actually plays Jane Payne. So we saw her in the last episode, and is directed by Matt Lipsey. First of all, I really like the title, Headspace, because I felt like we were delving into the headspace of a lot of different people in this episode. And it was funny because I thought about in the last episode, you said, you know, we don't really have any quotables for Dr. Sharon because we're never in her sessions. And I felt like in this one, we walked away with like a handful.
Dude, so many.
Yeah. So we have like three kind of storylines going. We've got Ted and his therapy issues. We've got the Roy Keeley issue, which I loved. And then we've got Nate, the continual unraveling of Nate. What did you feel were some of the themes, or what came up for you?
I feel like the theme of this episode is trauma. I'm surprised they didn't call this trauma episode because, my gosh, the amount of trauma from previous injuries affecting people now is significant, whether that's Ted with his own trauma from past experiences with therapy, or my gosh, Nate like recreating his father whenever he interacts with anybody.
I know.
And he just keeps doom scrolling, looking for, just more external praise. It's just really sad.
Yeah. I wouldn't characterize it as doom scrolling, only because doom scrolling is where we can't stop looking at the bad things.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
In this case, he's really looking for like you said, all that external validation. It took me a minute to figure out, like, one thing I was trying to figure out was how much time had actually passed, because I was like, how many days is this kid in the news cycle? But I think it's only been like a day or two. So I don't think a lot of time has actually passed since we saw that game or the match where he made the call and stuff. But
I think he also was looking at the same tweets over and over again.
That was the other thing. I meant to go back today and I didn't have a chance, but I was wondering that too. I was like, does he keep reopening the same article? Like,
I mean, yeah. I mean, it's AFC Richmond. I mean, not to knock it, but it's still a small team. There's not going to be that many tweets after a while. So it's just like, I think he just was rereading the tweets over and over and over again.
Yeah, because at one point it showed like there was a tweet from 2 days earlier, and then the next tweet was like 14 minutes ago or something like that. So yeah, I think you're right. Like, it was a lot of going back. But the themes that came up for me on this were like boundaries in relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And so whether it's romantic or whether it's professional, whether it's like this therapist kind of relationship, but there was definitely a lot around boundaries. And then the other thing was like this interesting, I guess, like what it means to be like a strong or resilient person. Because I think there are a lot of leaders out there that are strong leaders that, like how Rebecca was saying in, I think 2 episodes ago, about you don't have to yell you just have to be assertive. And so, like, I think there's a lot of leaders who are assertive and they're good at what they do and they're strong without having to be mean.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because you've got like Ted and Nate, which feel like two ends of that spectrum. And so I don't know. So those were kind of the overarching things that came up for me. But
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to understand Nate or put myself in Nate's shoes, and it's like, okay, what are examples of strong leadership for him, right? What are examples of strong, I don't know, figures? And I think he sees his father as like he needs approval from his father. And that's so apparent right from the very beginning when
mhm,
he comes over and he gives flowers and he's like, it's not that big of a deal, Mom. Just giving flowers, just a regular day, even though he knows it's not a regular day because he
right.
knows he's in the paper that day, right?
Yep. Yep.
And, and then it's so ironic that the article's on the back of the newspaper and it's like the last thing his dad reads, right?
Yeah.
And, and then even how he says, he's like, oh, look at what's at the back of the newspaper. Like, instead of just acknowledging it, he's just trying to be like subtle about it.
Yeah.
And then his father goes, they say humility is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking about yourself less. And it's just like, oh, gosh. It's just
That I
like,
know. That was like that hurt. I
that
was just
hurt.
like, ooh.
And it's like he hit him right there because it's like, Nate thinks about himself all the time. And I think we all think about ourselves all the time to a point, but Nate really is needing that certain level of approval, specifically from his dad, all the way going back to like the restaurant scene, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And you almost feel so sad because you see the suggestion box that he made last year, which I've totally forgot that he made that suggestion box.
This was a new one though.
What do you mean?
Are you talking about the one that was on the table?
Yeah, what was that one on the table?
Yeah, this was a new one because he looks at it. He's like, "Oh, this one's cute." Like it's a new one that his niece has made, so it's not one that he took in.
Oh, but so what's interesting to me is the fact that he moved it. I feel like there was some symbolism of like, oh, this is just so ridiculous. But in the past,
Yeah,
it was a big thing. It was like one of his first things he ever
yeah,
suggested, right? It was the
yeah,
first project he had was to like design the box, right?
yeah.
And now he's just like angry at it and just being like, that's for children. And he's kind of like letting go of his play because he's like so focused on trying to be perfect. Yeah. And it's like he's in this like mental jail, in my opinion.
Oh, that's so interesting. I didn't pick up on that at all. Like, all I heard him say was like, I heard him pick it up, look at it, and say, "Oh, this is cute," and then put it to the side. I just thought it was because he was sitting down and it was in his way, but it could be. I'd have to go back and take a look. But yeah, to go back to the earlier point about how he approaches pointing out the headline about him in the paper, like you get the impression that this is like he's approaching it this way because it's like a lesson learned from the past, right? Like he's already experienced some kind of trauma from his father or like reaction from his father that, probably similar to what he said to him in this moment, which is why he approaches it that way to be like, oh, well, like instead of, like you said, coming in and being like, hey, guess what? Like, I have my moment in the sun finally, and everybody's celebrating him. But it's also interesting because you've got his mom who wants to like really like,
Yeah.
celebrate him, and she even calls him her wonder kid or something. And then the funniest thing to me was the number of times that he doubled down on, oh no, I said wonderkind, and everyone's
I know.
like, we literally heard you on the news. Like, you actually said, "Can you edit that out?" And they said, "No."
But also, it's like, who cares? No one cares except for him. And he's so focused on being perfect. And you're like,
Yeah,
dude, like,
yeah.
calm down. It's not that big of a deal. But he thinks, yeah.
I think we've all been there in a way where, like, we make a mistake, and in our minds, we blow it up to be so big, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we're embarrassed. And you're right, nobody else cares. Like, they're not thinking about it anymore, but we just keep, like, going with it and thinking about it. But yeah, like it just like all I could keep thinking was like all those people yelling fake news all the time. Like I felt like he'd be one of those people in that moment to be like,
Right.
no, like that's fake news. I didn't say that. And so, yeah, I just thought that that was really interesting that he really in every instance of this episode, he kept saying, "Oh no, no, I said Wonderkin."
And I think he's looking for that moment. And I remember when I used to look for that moment from my dad, like looking for that moment where you finally get the approval, right? Where
Mhm.
finally, and maybe he thought he was going to get that when he got the table, and then he didn't get it when he got the table. And now he's going to get it here because it's not, he didn't get it this time. Like now, what else does he have to do for his father to get that approval? But it's just this constant chasing of this believing happiness is just around the corner once he does this one last thing. It's just fascinating because, and the reason why I referred to it earlier as doom scrolling is because like he's heading towards his doom each time he scrolls because he constantly is looking for that consistent validation, which will not definitely come from Twitter of all places, especially now. And then he eventually bumps into a tweet that says he's a loser. And then that's the one thing he actually pays attention to. It's just like more people reiterating what he already thinks about himself based off of what he thinks his father thinks about him.
Yeah, and so that whole thing really brought up this idea of negativity bias, right? So
Yeah.
he's gotten literally hundreds of tweets saying that he made a great call and he's this, great like strategist, all this stuff. And even like the stuff he was listening to in the headset, someone saying that he deserved his own team. And so you've got like all this really great feedback. And then the one piece of negative feedback that he sees like sends him into a tailspin. And that's a pretty common thing, right? And I think we've talked about this before that, as humans, we have this built in negativity bias so that,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a survival mechanism, right? So as soon as like our brain sees that, it feels like there's some kind of attack about to happen. And we go into like this protective mode of fight or flight. And so in this case, the fight that came out was directed at Will,
Yeah.
the Kit Man, right? So as soon as he saw that negative tweet, like he turned around, walked into that boot room and like threatened him basically.
Mm-hmm.
And it really reminded me of in that moment, I felt like a visceral reaction to
Yeah.
just because we don't see it, right? We just hear it. It reminded me of those kind of like domestic violence situations where,
Mm-hmm.
he's doing it in a way where nobody else is going to hear, nobody else is going to know. Yeah, it left a really bad taste in my mouth.
Oh, yeah. Especially in that environment of all places, Ted Lasso's place where everyone is being kind and, and looking out for one another. And going back earlier to Nate, at the beginning, right? So, he gets roasted by all the people, all the players, and they're like, is it Wonder? And then he like goes after Colin, right?
Mm,
And he goes after Colin, and then he benches Colin during practice, which is like really messed up, dude. Knowing,
yeah.
and maybe he knows or maybe he doesn't know, but he knows that, Colin is struggling to recognize if he's a strong and capable man, right? And now, and now,
Yeah.
now it's like, and this is the effect. I'm currently writing a chapter for a friend's book on toxic workplaces, and this is how toxicity can be contagious, right?
Mhm,
So
mhm.
it's like being transferred now to Colin, and now Colin's feeling really bad about himself, and then it's transferred over to the Kit Man. It's just like, oh my goodness, right? So you're like, dude, not only is he benching him, but then that's absolutely definitely not helpful for Colin to get better anyway. So yeah, I thought that was messed up. And then later on, what he says to him, oh my gosh.
I know. Well, I was curious. Like, I am curious if he knows that Colin is seeing Dr. Sharon and that he's got this. Because I know Colin's not like Colin tells everybody that's my mentor, but we haven't seen him say that to Nate or in a place where Nate would overhear it. But maybe he has. Because I was curious, like, what was the weakness that he saw in Colin to like direct his anger at him? Because I know, like, I know that Colin was one of his bullies before, But so was Jamie. So was like, they've all bullied him before
It's because, and he says it later, right? Is because he's the weakest of that group.
in the playing. Okay.
He's the weakest player of the group. So he's just like, I'm going to go after the weakest person. Kind of like how he feels. I mean, his dad goes after him. He's considered probably the weakest as well. So it's just like,
Right. That makes sense.
that's part of the thing. I'm just going to go after that one person. And the roast, the burn that he first gives the Colin is kind of funny, right? You're like, okay, well done. But the benching part to me was the part that it was just like,
Yeah.
whoa, that second part's like we're all like ribbing each other right now, but now like, dude, now you're affecting his performance, which is affecting the team, and that's not. And I think I've talked about this before, but it's like, what's the difference between a bad boss and a toxic boss? A toxic boss, you mentally and physically feel a certain level of harm. Just bad bosses are just like bad leaders and like whatever, they can't motivate you, but like a toxic boss makes you feel horrible about yourself.
Yeah, and I think about the courage it would have taken Colin to actually go and talk to him afterwards, right? To address it and be like, "Hey, like did I do something?" And the first thing I noticed was that like Nate doesn't even turn around.
I know.
I was like, "Good lord, like seriously?"
Well, he didn't turn around both times. The kit guy came in with the pens, didn't turn around. And then, so it's just like, I don't think,
Yeah.
going back to your question earlier of like, does Nate know about Colin and the therapy? I don't think he cares. I think he's so self-involved in his own tweets that he does not care about anybody else, frankly.
Well, but see, I don't know. Like I think that if somebody else was to walk in and say something, if he didn't feel like they were like the weaker person,
Good point.
I think he would turn around, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
True.
I think that's part of it is his like that's his way of showing his dominance or something. I don't know. First of all, I thought it was weird that Beard just keeps like watching what's happening. I guess not weird. Maybe he was watching to see if it's a one-off or if it's like continuous, right? But he finally does call him out on it and he says do better.
Yeah.
And so then Nate makes the apology in front of the team, which I was kind of like I feel like that's something you do one-on-one,
Probably.
right? Because it felt very performative, right? Like,
Oh, interesting.
I'm gonna do this thing because I was told that I was out of line, so I'm gonna like go and make this big show of it.
Huh. Oh, interesting.
And then everyone, so then like when they all start going down the line and calling him the different names, right? So it was asshole, prick, dick. I love Danny is the only one who really calls it though. He says wounded butterfly. And I was like,
butterfly. That is
like,
the
yes.
perfect analogy because you're like, what's wrong, butterfly? Like you've been a butterfly for so long and now you seem so wounded, right?
Yeah.
And it kind of ties in with, I think I've talked about this before, the whole term alpha male, which was debunked by the person that created it. But, the study of alpha males is the study of insecure creatures in captivity, right? Because that's what he found. And like I kind of feel like that's what Nate's in. He's like in this cocoon of ego and he like can't get out of his own way.
Yeah. And it just like keeps getting like bigger and bigger around him, you know? So yeah, cocoon of ego.
But I didn't even think about it being performative. I thought it was somewhat genuine because he did it in front of everybody else and he could have just done it straight for Colin. So I at the time liked it because then after he did it, then they all like hugged and they gave him like a group hug. And I love this part where then Ted was like, do I need to know anything about this? And then Beard's like, nope, I got it. Or it's already settled. And then Ted said something like, sometimes the best stew is the one you leave overnight while you're watching Citizen Kane or something, or you fall asleep watching Citizen Kane. But I love that as well, because that also teaches a certain level of like, I trust my staff and have delegated it. And it's great that I just don't need to be a part of every single thing. And I think in the past, maybe Ted would have been part of it, but this time he didn't need to be.
Yeah. Well, so I kind of sat with that yesterday too. I had a note that I made, thinking about because one of the things that Nate immediately says when Beard calls him out, he's like, "Oh, well, did you tell Ted?" And so there's still like some fear there of not wanting to disappoint Ted.
Mm-hmm.
I did sit with it a little bit and I wondered like was it purely like Beard's like this is my role as assistant head coach to, to deal with this stuff, or was it more that he knows that Ted is also kind of struggling right now, and maybe like he doesn't need to deal with this, you know? I don't know.
I think it's both. I definitely think it's both. Well, he doesn't really know what's going on with Ted. I mean, to a point. But I think the other part was just like, this doesn't need to be a whole big thing. You
Yeah.
know, let me just and it's really short too, right? He's like, do better. You were mean to him, do better. I mean, it's 2 sentences. And then
Yeah.
he tells him, why did he tell him to like, you know, the door is behind you? Why did he do
Yeah.
that? Why did he do that?
I think it was just like a little comedy thing, and then he disappears, right? Because it takes Nate a second to be like, "Oh, wait, this is my office."
But
And then when
I
he
thought it was something bigger. I thought it was just like the door's behind you, meaning like, and then he's like, wait a minute, that's my office. Just like, it's only your office. It's a privilege to have this office,
Yeah.
but you only should have this office as long as you are, you know, in line with the values of believe, right? And if you're not, then what are you doing here?
Yeah. No, I love that interpretation for sure. For sure. Yeah, so Nate's definitely walking a path right now.
Nate's a lot. I could spend more time about Nate. I mean, Nate's just toxic all around, and I'm really nervous now about what's going to happen next. I'm like, yikes!
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about Ted and Dr. Sharon. So, yeah, I loved this storyline too. Yeah, so last week we ended with Ted finally asking for help, right? And so he shows up for his appointment and like it was like a shit show. He was just like all over the
just
place.
fidgety and touching and making so many comments, and I almost got annoyed by his colloquialisms after a while. I was like, just relax, dude.
Yeah, it was almost 2 full minutes of him like moving around like and I think what's really brilliant about the way that they directed that is or wrote it is I as the viewer started feeling really uncomfortable.
Yes.
You know? I was like, "Oh my gosh, like sit down, dude." And I think and I love that Dr. Sharon like recognizes that. And the first thing she says to him is don't worry.
Yeah.
And just like oh, it just like took the whole thing down, you know? Like you could feel the calmness coming through.
Until he storms out. Until she's like, just tell me about what happened. And then he just runs out and I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
But that's why I love that he actually came back.
Yeah, so it was almost like 3 rounds. So round 1 was like that initial one, and I did like the call out to Don Draper because
Oh, yeah.
Mad Men is one of my favorite shows, and so I really appreciated that. They talk about the tissues, right? And she says sometimes it gets a bit emotional in here, and then she like says, "Don't worry," and and he like just he's like, "Nope, can't do this," and gets up and leaves. Right. And then round 2 is comes back and she's surprised that he's back, but he explains that he never quits, right? But now we start to get a little bit more information, I think, because we see like his anger starting to come through about therapy.
And very angry and angry
Yeah.
about like really small things. Like
Yeah.
he's just like, you know, how long is your session? Oh, it's 50 minutes, but how much do you charge? You charge by the hour? Interesting. It was like, what is he talking about? You know, like, you know, and is that the second time is when he went off on her work?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
my gosh. When he said that, when he was just like, you know, you don't know who I am. You're getting paid to pretend that you're interested in me, but you don't care either way. I mean, you could just hear the trauma from like his past therapy session with
Yes.
his wife and just being like, you are to blame as to why I'm sitting in here in London and she's sitting in Kansas City right now. And she'd be even angry at me, or the therapist would be really angry at me as well because I'm still saying she's my wife, you know? Like you're like, oh man, there's just so much there.
Yeah, it was definitely a button being pressed for Ted, right? And we don't see like this level of anger from Ted very often. And so the fact that he's like, you know, therapy's bullshit and you're only listening because you're paid to and you don't really care about me. Like there's just like a lot coming at her. And
Wait, when's the last time you saw him that angry? As I don't remember the last time I saw him that angry.
I mean, I think the only time I remember him getting really angry was like with Jamie with the whole that Allen Iverson practice thing.
Oh, the practice thing? Yeah.
Yeah, beyond that, I don't remember offhand right now him getting super angry either.
The only other time I remember him getting angry was when he went off on the team.
When he was being led Tasso.
Yeah, he was being led Tasso. Yeah. But I've never seen him get angry at an individual like that,
Yeah.
besides maybe Jamie. And even that was slightly performative. This was just like mean.
It was mean, yeah.
And then he's like, "What? You're gonna just talk to me this whole time?" And then eventually, what? You're gonna just probably just blame it on my folks? You know, talk about BS. Like, where
Yeah.
you charge for an hour, but I only get 50 minutes, and then he storms off.
Yeah. And then round 3 was he comes back, but this time she's expecting him. Like she doesn't. Did you notice she didn't even look up when
Yep.
she says, you know, come in, Ted? And the thing that stood out for me is like I feel like this show does such a beautiful job at modeling the tough conversations, right? So last week we had Higgins
Mm-hmm.
when he called out the Diamond Dogs to be like, you know, I'm really disappointed that none of you had my back.
Mm-hmm.
And this time we have Dr. Sharon, and she's just, and it reminded me of Brene Brown, like how she always says, you know, direct is kind.
Yeah.
And she tells him, like, you know, I was really offended by what you said about my profession. And she lays out her case. And I thought that the way she did it was like, you know, it was really just calm and like, you know, fact based. It wasn't personal, but she held him accountable
Mm-hmm.
in a way that needed to happen. I have to say, like, even that scene about Colin coming to talk to Nate, like really great modeling about, you know, addressing issues in the moment rather than letting them fester and whatever, you know.
And also modeling like not attacking the person's character, but just simply like addressing the behavior and addressing where like you're coming from, right? So like in Colin's case, he's just like, did I do anything to offend you? Like I'm just trying to be curious and find out what the issue might be, right? And then I think in the doc's case, she's just like, well, let me just explain to you how I feel and let me connect it to how you would feel about, you know, you coaching and, you know, the fact that like you're just because you're getting paid for it, do I assume that you don't care about your players? Like that was such a good point and done so well. And then they start playing, they start getting attuned because even when he throws the Kleenex box, like they're laughing and they're mirroring each other. Like you can start to see a lot of that mirroring and giggles and laughter, which always creates a certain level of psychological safety. So it's just she's so good. She's just so good.
Yeah. And it's like, you know, I think the connection there is happening, like you said, like the laughter and stuff, but even neurobiologically, right? Like you've got those hormones, like the oxytocin being released when you're in kind of, and that's like that feel good, you know, whatever. And so like you can see that connection happening.
I'll just say what was fascinating for me was like we finally got some of, you know, Dr. Sharon's like quotes, right? You know, and she starts speaking to him in his language. And he said, like, I think the first real truthful statement he says is like, maybe I don't want to learn the truth. And then
Mhm.
she's like, the truth will set you free, but it'll first piss you off. And he's like, woo, like he's like, woo, wee.
Yeah.
And then she busts out the, well, I can't be your mentor without first being your tormentor. And he's like, woo, wee. Like he's just like
Yeah.
she's now speaking his language, the cadence, all the things,
Yeah.
and he's like he's loving that.
And she knows it, right? Because that's the really like best part of that is as soon as she finishes that line and he says, "Oh, I like that," she says, "I thought you would."
Yeah,
Like
I know. Yeah,
she's getting to know who
yeah.
he is and like really understands that. And I thought that that was really just really lovely. So it was interesting to see Ted in this place and watching him like, you know, in this headspace of like going through these different things, right? So the round 1 was really like he's there, he's like, "Okay, actually I'm better, it'll be fine."
Mm-hmm.
Round 2 is just pure anger.
Mm-hmm.
And then round 3 is finally like, "Okay, I'm ready to do this," you know? It was interesting to kind of watch him go through those motions to actually get there.
I also wondered if I could see it also in the pitch when he was coaching.
Mhm.
Because remember when he started like talking to the players and I think he brought up another colloquialism. He was saying something and they're all just sitting there listening. And I was just like, hurry up, Ted. Like I started getting annoyed with him. And I usually
Mhm.
like listening heartfelt to him, but I was like, oh, it's boiling over, it's trickling over into the pitch. But I
Yeah.
don't think it was. But I'm just so happy that he's actually going.
Yeah.
Like that's
Yeah.
just a huge thing and that he keeps coming back because he doesn't have to, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
just to think how good their team will be when he's able to address this. Oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
so good, right?
So the other thing that she said that I just loved was self-care can be scary and fight or flight is a natural response and you happen to do both.
Mm.
And then she says impressive range. So this is like an area that I work on a lot, right? Whether with leaders or organizations. And now this is like a lot of what's in my book too is around duty of care, self-care. But I think oftentimes there's like this association with the concept of self-care as it being this soft thing, and that if you practice self-care, you're not really tough and and whatever. But it is like the hardest thing we can do, right? Like it requires so many boundaries. Like when I do workshops on self-care, I always talk about self-care is literally boundary setting and enforcement
Yeah.
because it's not about bubble baths, it's not about tea, it's not, like it's not any of those things, but it's really like finding the thing that is going to allow you to feel like your best self and giving yourself permission to experience that and not give up that time because somebody else needs you or something else came up, but really like holding that time sacred. And so this idea of therapy as self-care, like delving into our issues and having to look at
Yeah.
our lives, who wants to do that? Like it's not fun.
No.
Yeah, so I loved that she highlighted that for him and really just normalized it, right? Fight or flight is a normal response. And this is like it's such an important thing that I really really want leaders to understand is like when there's conflict, when things are happening with people on their team, it's very likely that this is the space they're in. So how do you help people regulate their nervous systems and get out of fight or flight? And that's what we see her doing. She's totally helping him co-regulate by
Mm-hmm.
keeping herself calm and like talking to him and saying the things that he connects to. She's in turn helping him co-regulate so that he can get back into this place that he's not in fight or flight anymore and he can actually, have some agency and make, and talk about what's happening rather than reacting to his fear.
Yeah. Well, also there's the whole idea of self-care is also self-reflection and finding out more of who you are, right?
Mhm.
And I think in Ted's case, he's just like, well, maybe I don't want to learn the truth. Like maybe I don't want to learn that aspect of me. It will set you free, but it's going to first piss you off. Like I don't want to go through that whole trip of having it piss me off, right? And that's scary, right? That's scary for all of us. And I love that you said the whole thing of like it's not just bath bombs and and Brene Brown playing in the background, but I think we want that to be because that's much easier. It's a much easier quick fix than being like, okay,
Let's get to the root issue.
yeah, let's talk about the trauma. And you're like, why can't we just skip over the traumas? Why do we got to go down the valley in order to come out on the other side? Can't I just hang out here?
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's definitely an interesting area to explore. And I think they did it with like really like this delicacy and grace. And it was just a really beautiful, that whole round three was really lovely to see.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was the whole thing with Ted and Trent Krim. And so we see Trent Krim of The Independent just very briefly in the pub asking for a quote. And like, at least I felt like you could see the wheels starting to turn in Ted's head again, because now we know that he's lying, right? Like he's full on lying.
Yeah. And Krim kind of knows he's lying too.
Yeah, I was curious about that, right? Like the way that he says it makes it seem like maybe he knows there's something more to the
Yeah.
story than just food poisoning.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, like I feel like he now has this respect for Ted and he's willing to go with it,
Yeah.
you know?
For now.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a journalist through and through, so I'm sure he like picks up on that vibe already, but he's just like, it's all about the good story as well. He has to chase the good story. So I feel like this is gonna, I don't know, I haven't seen it, but I feel like this is gonna come up later in some way or another. And you could see the doubt in Ted's face. And it's scary. It was scary because I was just like, don't tell him.
Okay, so let's shift and talk about Roy and Keeley. Like, if this is not the episode where everyone falls in love with Roy, like, I don't know, like, what is? Because I was like, so we start out with like the I Got You Babe song by Sonny and Cher, which, it just makes everything feel really idyllic. And you see him like wake up and then he like gazes over at her lovingly and he's just there all the time. And on the one hand, it's like, oh, that's so sweet. You
Right.
can see by Keely's reactions that there's like something's not right, And she's so subtle about it in like the scenes, which I think is really funny. Like she's like, "Oh, hi," or like just said, I don't know if you noticed, like when they got to work and he was like, "Oh, wait, like, aren't you going to your office?" And this brief like look crosses over her face before she's like, no, I'm gonna go get a cup of tea." Yeah, yeah. So I was curious, like, what came up for you around this one because the relationship one is always interesting.
So much pain and lack of freedom. I was like, oh, this is one reason why I'm like, oh, this is great that I'm not married. I was just like, is it like this? I'm like, oh, this is because it's just like it's routine and it's routine and it's routine and when he asked her where she's going, I was just like, dude, like relax. Like, oh man, do you have a life outside of her? Like, do you have any friends besides the yoga ladies? Like, get some other friends, right? I think of like my dad. My dad was a great example. Is like he had work and then he hung out with my mom. So he didn't really have that many other friends like besides the ones like in St. Vincent that he would call from time to time, or they call him. But after a while, my mom when he retired was like, dude, do you have anything else you can do besides being here, like right next to me, like you know, as my friend Antoine would say, separate togetherness. Like, I want to be near you, but I don't want to be by you all the time, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I think the comedian Patrice O'Neill would say that as well. He'd just be like, you can be in the vent. Can you just not be like right near me all the time? And that was the vibe I was getting from Roy. Like, oh,
Yeah, it was a lot. And like it did make me wonder, part of why it feels charming in some ways is because we know Roy and we know like he's got this squishy center and whatever. But like if I didn't know Roy and I saw that happening, like yeah, it would feel very like possessive
yeah.
and like bordering on like, hey, this is like moving into like this place where he's going to isolate you and not let you have any other friends either, like. And so it was really like playing with a lot of that stuff, I thought. But yeah, so I love that scene in the boot room.
Oh, yeah. So good.
So you've got Keely needing space, and then you got Rebecca, or no, I guess Ted comes in first, and then Rebecca comes in.
And then Higgins.
And then Higgins. And I don't know if you noticed, I didn't know, this is the first time I ever noticed that Higgins is actually standing there smoking a pipe.
Oh, is he really? I love that they just have these rooms where they do random stuff too, right? You're like throughout the day, I'm like wondering what they are doing, and you're like, oh, okay, now it's time for the boot room, and then the only person that actually should be in there is the kid guy, and he's just like, should I be here? And they're like, yeah, do whatever you got to do.
First of all, it's so gross to think about because those are all like used boots, right? Like he's cleaning them out and whatever, but like, oh, that's so disgusting. But yeah, the fact that they're all smoking in there and that's the room where smoking doesn't count. So that was kind of funny. But you've got like all this different advice coming at her, right? And that's really interesting too, because you've got Rebecca, who's like, and I love the comment she makes, stop auditioning your complaints. I loved that. And just tell the person who can actually do something about it. Like and it really made me think, like, there's so many times where we, like, I know I've done this, right? Like we want validation for how we're feeling. So we will tell everyone and their mother around us, except for the person, like, why this is bothering me or what's, because we want people to be like, oh yeah, you're totally right.
Yeah.
And so I love that. Stop auditioning your complaints. But Rebecca's in this place though, right? Like she's in this weird place of needing to take some action because that's like what she's thinking about
Because
with
she's not
his,
taking action. Right.
because she's not taking action. And then you've got Ted who's like, just bottle it up. So it's okay to bottle it up because that's where he's at.
Because that's where pickles come from. I thought that was genius. And
Pickles, olive oil.
The kid guy was like olive oil, and then what was the other ones? I was like, these are really good points. There was another one.
There was another one. I can't remember what it was.
Okay, but I was like, things do get better pickled, or if they sit for a while. Wine, maybe.
Yeah. So, but I love that
funny.
both Keely and Roy each describe each other as the cat's pajamas. I think that's really cute.
Oh, I didn't notice that, huh?
So when everybody is like, throwing all this stuff at her, and then clueless Jamie walks in, just wanting his name bigger on his jersey. And then I think he says something too, like he's a grumpy old twat or something like that. And Ted's like, and Ted says, oh, I take umbrage. Grumpy is fine. And Keely's like, no, like Roy's perfect. And I think he's, and so when she says that he's the cat's pajamas, and then later when we see Roy, like with the whole bathtub thing, and he tells her that he thinks she's the cat's pajamas. And so I thought that was really cute.
I also, and correct me if you've ever seen this yourself, but like people always give advice that they should be giving to themselves, right? Like they always are giving out, like, especially when someone is so adamant to give their advice, like it's not in a comment, be like, this is what you have to do, right?
Yeah.
Whenever I've heard that tone, then I'm like, oh, here it goes. And I've seen myself do that numerous times, and I see it all the time from other people, because we're hoping that maybe if this person takes my advice and then they do it, maybe it'll inspire me to do it.
Yeah. And so I know, I totally agree. Like, I think that happens a lot where, we're just all auditioning our advice too, right? Like our complaints and our advice.
Yep.
Yeah. But then we've got that scene at home where, so first, the first one is like where Keely's trying to work. Roy's just like, let me kiss your arm, let me kiss your neck. And, and all she wants to do is work. And then she gets distracted and like, she's not able to do that. Right. And then the next time they're at home, she's watching Sex and the City. She just wants to watch her show.
I've seen that episode. I remember that episode.
I know, it's such a good episode. But again, just so brilliant how they lay it out, because Roy comes, first of all, he sits down right in front of her. And like, I'm like, dude, your head is so big.
I know. And why are you commenting out loud on the Da Vinci Code? Like it's not that good of a book. I didn't read all of it, but
I loved reading it because it was, like he said, the chapters are short and like, it's like you can't put it down because you just want to know what happens next. So like, I thought it was funny that he's like so into that book, but that his mind is being blown to the point of where he's just like making all these comments.
Yeah.
And to see her blow up though, and so when he's like talking, and you see her face just starting to like change, you could hear Carrie on Sex and the City yelling, shut up, just shut up. And it's all perfectly timed. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's so perfect. But he's never seen her like that.
Right.
He's never seen her like so angry.
And I mean, talk about also trauma. I wonder, because, we forget from like the first season that like Keely was like an influencer, right? Like she's, besides just being a marketing person at the time, she was like very famous, even on those, whatever those hotel TV, announcements.
Yeah.
So she's probably dated other people that have been very clingy
Mm-hmm.
And now she's dating another celebrity, right? So like he's also well known, but he's doing the same thing to her. And I wonder if she wonders, like, oh my gosh, is this the end? Like, is this, even though this is perfect and I should be really happy, am I?
Yeah. But I also wonder if it's the flip. Like, I wonder if in the past maybe she's been a little bit more clingy at
True.
times.
Oh, with like
And
Jamie.
now
Yep.
and now she's experiencing the other side of it, right?
True.
And now she's also like, she's got like an actual position and she's got
Mm-hmm.
things that are important to her and she's like growing and evolving and, and she needs her space to do that. And that's hard. Like, I know, like, I've definitely been in relationships where I'm on that end of it, where I just feel so like suffocated because I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
I have other things in my life besides you.
Right.
And,
Right.
but from his perspective, given how much she really pushed to have him communicate his feelings, the fact that he's doing that, like, maybe there's also some fear for him about things being over, like with being too smothering or too whatever. But oh, that moment when he makes that like connection that this whole time that she's been talking to people about him. And I love that every time he asks, "Are you guys talking about me?" She's always like, "Yeah, yeah."
This is why I didn't think he was possessive, because
Yeah.
whenever he would say that, it would just be like, okay, you ready to go? Like he was not affected by that. He wasn't trying to
Yeah.
control her. It was
Oh
just
no,
like,
yeah.
and that's why I was like, okay, this is cute. But yeah,
Yeah.
when he finally realizes,
Yeah. No,
oh,
but that just like I was like, "Oh, poor Roy."
how.
But no, I wasn't saying that he is possessive. I'm saying because we know him
Oh
and
no,
we
I know you're not
know.
saying that.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
just
yeah.
thinking earlier when we were like, yikes, this guy's really scaring me. Like, that's a possibility. But yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was like it was pretty funny, but the way that he comes to that realization, I love that of all people is Jamie who's going to teach him that lesson, or help him recognize like what's actually happening
Wait. So
in a
going back,
totally unrelated way.
so he storms off. Why do you think he storms off?
From Keely's house?
Yeah.
I think he's embarrassed.
Mm.
I think he's like really embarrassed because he's now realized like, oh, all these people have been hearing about this from Keely, and now they all are going to think that I'm like needy and
Mm.
clingy and all this stuff. And that's like, that's not me. And so I think he was embarrassed more than anything.
So then the next day when he comes and he like barely acknowledges her, he's back to like stern Roy Kent,
Exactly.
and nobody is let in, especially you, Keely, but nobody's let in. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, like the patterns we repeat, right? So that's like that's his comfort zone.
Yep.
He's in fight or flight. So he's going to be in like flight mode where he's just going to do everything to like get out of that situation. He's in fight mode where he's just like in that space of blame and whatever. And then maybe even a little bit of fake mode where he's just going to be like, whatever, I don't care.
And then what do you think was the epiphany that he had when Jamie brought up the thing about like, I need to support my teammate by giving them what they need?
So he like, goes after Jamie. And so I think Roy's like tactic in that space is like your teammate needs you to be up behind them to support what they're doing. And
Mm.
Jamie, and I love Jamie's like respectfully coach, and starts to explain to him like, no, what he really needs for me to do is give him some space. And then and then Jan Moss jumps in to be like, he's right. And or no, first I think Roy like yells at him again, and then or no, he says, "What did you say?" And everyone is just like, "Oh man, we're back to this like Jamie Roy thing." Yeah, and I like that Jamie like doubles down again, still very respectfully. But I think what he says there though is something about like he needs me to trust him to ask me for what he needs or to do. And I think that was like the point at which he was like, "Oh,
Yeah.
okay." So he's telling you he needs space. And I
Well,
need to trust that that's like what, or not that he's telling you he needs space, but you're going to trust that if he wants you there, he's going to ask you to come there.
right. Well, the other thing that I think of also is what we said earlier about you typically give the advice that you want for yourself, right? So he's
Mhm.
giving advice to Jamie because he's like, this is how you support people.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
Jamie's like, no, you kind of find out what they need. And he's like, no, you need to be around them all the time. And she's
Yeah.
like, well, I'm actually kind of crowding him then. No, but that's what they want. That's what they need. He's like,
Yeah.
have you asked him what he
Yeah.
needs? And then that's why I love when he's like, like,
Yeah.
and just walks off like practice is over. I gotta go get my niece's strobe light and some flowers from a separate garden. Oh, so well
Yeah.
done.
I thought that was really funny. Yeah, and then that last bit when Keely gets home and sees that his SUV is there, and then she goes in and finds his bag down there. And like I could see how that would like
Mm-hmm.
probably cause me some fear as well.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, and then we see that Roy is like course corrected. He's recognized that he screwed up. And I love the "Hey Siri, play the Roy is sorry for not understanding Keely playlist." I want to say that either Spotify or Apple, one of the two, actually has this list somewhere.
That's awesome.
But that Sade song is one of like I feel like the two best songs in this episode. Well, actually, all of the song, like the closing song where Nate is yelling at after he yells at Will
Mm.
is I Feel Free by Cream, which is a great song. That one I wasn't really sure about the meaning. Like I was trying to
Mm.
figure out like is it that he feels free because he's now just going to like let loose on this guy? Like I wasn't entirely sure. But the Sade songs by your side, like it's one of my favorites. And so yeah, I thought that that whole scene was just so adorable. And again, just such a, what I love about the show is it's not the like storybook romances,
Yeah.
like it's trying to kind of keep it real. Like this is probably something most people experience in relationships where at
Yeah.
some point or another where like you're like, man, I just need you to back off and give me like
Yeah.
5 minutes to myself. But we're scared to say that to people, right? Like in a relationship to tell someone, hey, I love you, but I really need to not be around you right now. Like it's really hard to say. And so the fact that she like bottled it up so as not to hurt his feelings and then it came out the way that it did. I just thought was such a like a real portrayal of like how people experience relationships sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But I love that they work through it,
Yeah.
and that they are learning how to communicate with each other. And again, just a really lovely modeling of, all right, you screwed up. Like, what are you going to do to fix it?
And it's also so well written in the way of like it gives you at first the perception because he's like literally taking her clothes off that you're like, oh, is he just going to do what he did before and they're just going to get down? And then all of a sudden he puts her, in like, or she gets into the tub and he's like, now you're not going to see me for 3 hours. And you're like, he does get it. He truly gets it, which turns her on. Like now she's like very excited that he's leaving. It's funny. And that's where I love the writing because that's a much more sophisticated, complex idea to communicate that someone is even now more attracted to you as they're giving you space rather than most shows that would just be like time for them to get it on because they miss each other. It's much more layered.
Yeah. I mean, it was wrapped up, but like not in that such a perfect bow like
Yeah.
most shows would do. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I
Like you
used to
can,
hate that about like,
yeah.
the Family Matters and, all the TGIF, ones, Full House and all those where like they're not getting along and then all of a sudden they get along in one conversation at the end. And you can't actually model that because like no conversation actually plays out that way. Like these, I mean, a lot of the hard conversations that happen in this episode, one can actually model, whether they're doing it in the workplace or doing it with their significant other.
The last little bit, I just want to talk for 2 minutes is about Rebecca and Sam. So
Mm?
we got that little bit of a, you know, breadcrumb last week that, okay,
Mm-hmm.
in fact, it is Sam. And And so this whole little thing was kind of cute too, in terms of like, your headspace when you're in those like beginning stages of like trying to figure out if someone's interested or whatever. And so they still don't know it's each other, but the fact that he's checking his phone, there's no response, the whole team is like, what's going
Oh,
on?
the
And
whole team is all over it. They're like 3 dots. They're all getting excited about the 3 dots.
yeah. And I love that. And then you've got like her headspace on the other end of it, right? Like she's like, what should I write? What should I do? What
Right.
should I do? And I love Higgins. Higgins is just like the truth teller, right? He's like, let's just say that, or why don't you tell him the truth that, he were afraid he's not going to live up to the fantasy you've built up, and that you're going to let your insecurities from possibly get in the way of possibly finding the true love of your life. And I just thought that was like, yeah, total. Yep. Higgins, you're absolutely right. Like, that's exactly what we do, right? Like, it's scary. It's so scary to put yourself out there.
So scary. So scary. And it's much easier to go to the Hunky Jesus app or whatever, the Hunky app,
It was the Two Messent app.
to Messent or whatever you call it, and go back to Hunky Luca, because you know what you get with Hunky Luca,
Exactly. And there's nothing deep there.
No, there's nothing deep there, but there's some fun, and it keeps you busy, kind of like watching Netflix, but a little bit more physical. And I think this was the first time for me because I was still stuck on her, like, falling in love with Ted or something like that, or I thought they were. But when I saw them together and I saw the chemistry, and then he was just like, wait, was that what you were going to say? And she's like, that is what I was going to say. And I was like, attunement. The play attunement is showing up again.
Yeah, he's so adorable. I really love him. Yeah, and then we see like, so Rebecca's on one end of the spectrum of all relationships are a nightmare. What happens, when we're like, if we get hurt, or I'm going to get hurt. Or no, she says, what if we meet up, it all goes wrong, all relationships are a nightmare. And so,
Yeah.
I think most of us think that at some point as we're going through that process of trying to meet people. But then you've got Higgins, who's just like is in so much love with his wife. And they've been married for however long. Like I absolutely love that. Like, yeah, their relationship is just so adorable.
Do you know people in your life that have that type of relationship?
Oh gosh. I'm sure we're gonna have a bunch of people be like, why didn't you say mine?
I know 2. No, maybe 3. I know 3.
Wow.
3.
Yeah.
And they're awesome, but also it's rare because I also know a lot of ones that are miserable. And it's like, ugh.
I can think of one where I think that they are in that space, that they've been together for a long time and they still genuinely enjoy each other's company and love each other and stuff. But for the rest of them, like I think people have good relationships. I think they just they seem like a lot more work. And it's not to say like Higgins and his wife do the work as well.
Right.
And he's talked about that before, But yeah, like it's just really lovely to hear someone talk about it that way, which is so nice.
I mean, whenever I see them, and I've commented to all 3 of these couples, I'm like, this is the type of relationship I'm looking for. I'm like, how did you get it? Almost like you're like, did you find it? Like, was it in the clearance section of Ross? Like, I'm trying to understand where did you pick this up?
Well, and probably every one of them, I don't know your friends, but like I would guess that every one of them has been through like the high highs and the low lows too, right? And like that's part of it. But what, again, like going back to what we're seeing with Roy and Keeley and building this foundation of like having to like go through the mess of it to get to the other side to really learn how to communicate and be in that space with each other, and learn to like recognize like, okay, if I think we've talked about this before, right? This idea that like, if you keep your hand open and put like a bunch of sand or water in it, like it'll stay there. But as soon as you close your fist, it starts to seep out, right? So this idea that the more we can let go, the easier it is for people to stay, right? And
But it's scary because as it's like slipping through
Yeah.
your hands, you're like, you want to squeeze even more, right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
maybe this is the lesson that I take from the whole episode as well, going back to the whole theme of trauma at the beginning, is just like, it's messy, right? Like all
Mm-hmm.
of this is messy. And if you're willing to sit in the awkwardness, in the gray, in the mess, something magical might come out of it, but you have to sit in it, and you have to get
Mm-hmm.
pissed off by it. And that's tough.
Yeah.
It's much
Yeah.
easier to talk about it than to actually do it.
Yeah. I think my takeaway from this one is about the boundaries. And so I think it builds on what you're saying. Like, I think setting and holding boundaries is a messy business too. And it makes people uncomfortable. And sometimes people take it personally when boundaries are set, right? And so it is also very messy. But when they're set and held in a way that's like respectful to each other or whatever, not just in a romantic relationship, but even in the workplace or whatever, I think that it creates a much better and stronger like relationship, to be able to exist within those boundaries. So that is what I'm taking away from this one. So
Well, this was an awesome episode. I'm excited to this continue. I love these episodes, and I appreciate you for having this conversation.
likewise, likewise. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for listening. We will see you next time. Thanks so much for listening to another episode of What Would Ted Lasso Do? If you got any nuggets of Ted Lasso wisdom from this episode, try them out in your life and let us know what happens at WWTLD Podcast on Instagram or on our website, wwtldpodcast.com, where you'll also find a full transcript of the show. We love hearing what other TED Heads took away from the episode or details or perspectives that we might have missed.
And if you do like the show, please subscribe and head on over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star rating. Every rating helps us get our show in front of more listeners. To that end, we'd also ask if you enjoy the show, please share it with your friends, loved ones, randos on the street. You get it.
Thank you to the team at Podify for producing our show, to Kajal Dabalia for all our visuals and graphics, and to Kenzie Slato for our theme song. And most of all, thank you to all of you for listening.
Ted Lasso could simply just be another show to binge watch, or if we challenge ourselves to consistently ask the question, what would Ted Lasso do? It could change the trajectory of your life. It has for us.
So join us again next time as we explore another episode and ask ourselves, what would Ted Lasso do?